A seasoned solo hiker with 6 years of experience found himself in a terrifying predicament in the Monongahela National Forest of West Virginia. After driving up from Virginia for a long weekend trip last October, he ventured into remote sections of the forest, seeking the solitude that only unmarked trails could provide. About 4 hours into his trek, he encountered a gorge. Not massive, but deep enough at 30 to 40 feet to cause serious injury or worse. A small creek ran along the rocky bottom, and the walls were impossible to climb due to loose shale and overhangs. Spanning the gap was a massive fallen oak tree, angled slightly between both sides. The bark had been worn smooth, likely from weather and previous hikers using it as a crossing point. After carefully inspecting it, he decided to make the crossing. Moving slowly and deliberately, he made it safely to the other side, feeling that familiar adrenaline rush from the balancing act. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Alright, let's dive back in. Then he heard it, a rhythmic thunking sound behind him. He turned to see a man in his 50s on the opposite bank, about 10 feet from where the tree met the edge. The stranger wore a ratty camouflage jacket and worn jeans, with a scraggly beard that gave him a lumberjack appearance. In his hands, a full-sized axe. Before the hiker could fully process what he was seeing, the man walked directly to the base of the tree and began swinging the axe at it. The hiker shouted across the gorge, demanding to know what he was doing. The axe wielder didn't even look up, he just kept swinging. One strike landed deeper than the others, and the tree shifted slightly. The hiker yelled louder, explaining he'd just crossed on that very tree. The horrifying realization set in. This man knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to trap him on the wrong side of the gorge. Despite the increasingly desperate and insulting things the hiker screamed at him, the man showed no signs of stopping. Finally, when the hiker yelled that he needed to cross back, the stranger looked up for the first time. "That's not my problem," he said, his tone casual as if discussing the weather. Something about that detached response sent the hiker into a rage. He started full-on screaming, saying things that, looking back, probably weren't wise. One comment must have struck a nerve because the axeman abruptly stopped swinging. He set down the axe and took several steps closer to the edge. Up close, his face was unsettling. His eyes were sunken and dark, almost as if the skin around them was bruised or stained. Leaning over the edge, he delivered a chilling statement. "I know these woods a lot better than you do." It wasn't threatening in an obvious way, it was worse. It was certain matter of fact, like he was stating an undeniable truth. They stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. Then the stranger picked up his axe, turned, and disappeared into the trees without another word. The hiker stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. The tree remained wedged in place, but he could see it wasn't stable anymore. The edge on the far side was splintered and cracked. He wanted to cross back immediately, but trusting his weight to that damaged tree was out of the question. His phone had zero service. He decided to cut the hike short and started walking downstream, hoping to find another crossing. For what must have been an hour, he followed the gorge, but it only got deeper. He was certain the gap was widening too. Every turn revealed more impossible terrain. The sun was dropping, and panic began to set in. He was miles from his car, heading in completely the wrong direction, and darkness was approaching fast. He seriously considered the insane option of climbing down into the gorge and back out when he stumbled upon what looked like a campsite in a small clearing. The fire pit appeared recently used, and for a moment he felt relief. Maybe another camper could help. But the longer he looked, the more wrong everything felt. Deep gouges and unrecognizable symbols were carved into the surrounding trees. Rusted tools and pieces of cloth tied to branches were scattered around. What appeared to be animal bones had been arranged in deliberate patterns. The sight sent him fleeing from the clearing, his fear now doubled. Then he heard it, footsteps behind him, or something like footsteps. Every time he spun around, everything went silent. He wondered if a predator was tracking him and picked up his pace, but the sounds only grew louder and closer. What happened next became the most terrifying moment of his life. When he glanced over his shoulder for perhaps the 20th time, He caught a glimpse of someone ducking behind a tree. Person. Scanning the forest, he realized there wasn't just one. There was another figure further to the left. They'd fanned out. He was being herded. Suddenly, they abandoned stealth. He saw what looked like a pipe or club in one of their hands. Without thinking further, he started running. They chased him openly now, no longer concerned with hiding. He couldn't explain how terrifying it was. Lost in the woods, the sun almost set, feeling like he was in a genuine life-or-death situation. One of his pursuers started screaming. Not words, just war cry-like screams that belonged in nightmares. The gorge remained on his left as he ran. Just as exhaustion threatened to slow him down, he saw another fallen tree. Much smaller than the first, but he had no choice. Without pausing to check its stability, he mounted it and started across, betting his entire life on that piece of wood. It held, and he made it to the other side. Turning around, he saw 3 figures, all looking like carbon copies of the Axeman. Filthy, menacing, one actually holding a pipe. The first one placed his hand on the tree as if to cross, then stepped back down. They stared at him menacingly, and he found himself frozen again. One of them told him to get the hell out of there, that he'd gotten lucky. That was all he needed to hear. He turned and ran exactly as they'd commanded, expecting to hear them behind him at any moment. But the forest had gone eerily quiet. The darkness didn't help, and he had to fight off several full breakdowns. Whether by luck or by running at an angle that brought him back toward civilization, he eventually found the trailhead. After driving home, he reported what he could, but he knew nothing would come of it. Months later, he still hikes, but it's not enjoyable anymore. He hopes to recapture that love someday. The first man with the axe haunts him especially. The way he looked at him, the things he said, as if he knew exactly what was going to happen. He probably did. He might have orchestrated the whole thing. 3 years ago, an experienced hiker was exploring a remote section of forest in northern Minnesota, far from any marked trails. He'd always preferred actual wilderness, not the sanitized version with wooden markers and worn paths. After roughly 4 hours, he realized he'd lost his bearings. Usually, he could orient himself quickly, but this time nothing looked familiar. The sun was still high enough that he wasn't in immediate danger, but that sick feeling of being lost had already settled in his stomach. As he continued walking, he picked up on a rustling sound behind him. It wasn't constant, just every 30 seconds or so, matching his pace. When he stopped, it stopped. When he walked, it resumed. He told himself it was probably a deer, but he'd hiked enough to know deer don't follow people like that. Then the rustling transformed into movement all around him. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. 6 or 7 wolves had surrounded him. Some snarled, others just stared, but their intent was clear. He was prey. He pulled out his knife despite knowing the odds were against him. This was it. This was how he'd die, alone in the woods because he was too stubborn to stick to marked trails. He was trying to decide his next move when something extraordinary happened. Every single wolf went rigid simultaneously, not reacting to each other but to something over his shoulder. Their ears shot up, they all looked in the same direction, and then they scattered, not just retreated, but full-on sprinted away as if they were being hunted. That's when real fear set in. The woods became completely silent. No wind, no birds, no animals, nothing. It was like someone had flipped a switch. The light seemed dimmer too, like his vision was fading before passing out. But the worst part was the question. What could have scared off an entire wolf pack from a distance? He couldn't imagine, but he needed to keep moving. He faced an impossible choice. Follow the wolves and potentially get more lost, or continue in the right direction toward whatever had terrified them. He chose to keep walking toward his destination, reasoning it was better to face the unknown in daylight than waste an hour and have to return in darkness. About 20 minutes later, he saw what looked like a clearing ahead. As he got closer, thinking it might be a campsite with a fire ring, he realized something was deeply wrong. Symbols were carved into the trees surrounding the clearing, not initials or trail markers, but intentional, deep cuts forming unrecognizable patterns. Things hung from branches on leather cords. Small bones, perhaps from birds or rodents, and rusted metal twisted into shapes that hurt to look at. The fire pit wasn't just a ring of stones. The stones were delicately stacked like structures. Inside were pieces of cloth, what looked like jewelry, and other objects he couldn't identify. But here's what made him truly panic. The smoke. Thick black smoke hung in the air about 6 feet from the ground. It wasn't moving or dissipating, and it didn't appear to be coming from the fire pit. It just existed there. The fire pit didn't even look recently used. He stood frozen at the clearing's edge, unable to look away from the smoke. His eyes kept tracking back to it even when he tried focusing elsewhere. The feeling was indescribable, like looking through a kitchen window into a backyard instead of actually being in the backyard. A feeling built in his chest, like grief and terror mixed together, but for something that hadn't happened yet. His body seemed to be mourning something in advance. He must have stood there for 5 minutes, staring at that smoke, before his brain finally kicked back online. The smoke didn't dissipate, it just stayed there. Finally, he found the strength to turn and run. Not walk or jog, he ran, overwhelmed with fear of something he couldn't name but knew he needed to escape. His memory gets foggy after that. He thinks it's because of how scared he was, his instincts taking over. But part of him believes the memory loss was somehow connected to whatever was in those woods, the smoke or what caused it or something else entirely. The next thing he remembers is being in darkness, meaning another hour or so had passed. Drenched in sweat and strangely freezing cold, he was approaching his car. He got in and drove off without another thought. He never reported what he found. What would he even say? He couldn't find that clearing again if he tried, and his memories weren't clear anyway. When he told his father, his dad simply said that everyone has that one experience sooner or later. This was his. The thing he still thinks about isn't how the wolves behaved, how the campsite looked, or even the impossible smoke. It's the memory loss. From all his research, scary moments get remembered better, not worse. So he has no choice but to think everything that happened that day was connected. When they were younger, a group of friends loved camping. Once they got their licenses at 16, they went out almost every weekend to new spots. Their parents didn't mind as long as they could protect themselves. So one father let them borrow his gun, a Taurus G2C. This incident happened when they were 18, seniors in high school. In February, the narrator, his girlfriend Sophia, his friend Derek, and Derek's girlfriend Rachel drove to Arkansas to backpack the Ozarks and see natural waterfalls. The 9-hour drive meant leaving early and arriving around 7 p.m. They set up camp at an established site for the night since they were tired. The narrator and Sophia shared one tent, Derek and Rachel another. The gun stayed in the narrator's tent. The first night passed without incident. The next morning, after breakfast, they drove to the trailhead planning to hike to a waterfall, then find a place to camp. On the hike, Rachel kept saying she saw someone standing still and staring at her, following without appearing to move. They stopped to look and saw a man quickly run away. Derek yelled at him to leave or they'd kick his ass. Mostly for show to impress his girlfriend, though they were capable of defending themselves if needed. They didn't see him again and eventually reached the waterfall, where they had lunch and took pictures. After about 2 hours, they decided to find a campsite before dark. While searching, the narrator noticed a freakishly tall, skinny woman staring at them. She had to be at least 6'5". It genuinely unsettled him. He pointed her out, and everyone else became uncomfortable too. They yelled at her to leave them alone and told her they had a gun. She turned and walked away. They decided to hike further since they were all creeped out, not knowing if the two strangers were connected. After another hour, they found a nice spot next to a small flowing creek with a relatively deep pool and decided to get in and relax. While splashing around, they talked about the earlier incidents and joked that they were probably hillbillies on drugs. When the sun started setting, they got out to make dinner, chicken breast to grill, rice and vegetables to boil, and potatoes. They always ate well on their camping trips. While the narrator cooked, Derek set up both tents. They ate, then cracked open some alcohol. The narrator, a heavy smoker, had brought weed and papers. They wanted a good time since they'd invested a lot of money in this trip. They told stories and laughed in their intoxicated state until Derek fell out of his chair laughing. This went on late into the night before they went to their tents. The narrator and Sophia were in their tent when they suddenly heard someone laughing outside. At first, he thought it was Derek, so he yelled, "What's so funny?" Derek yelled back, "That wasn't me." That response sank his soul and immediately sobered him up. He grabbed the gun, rushed out and fired several shots into the air, yelling for whoever it was to leave or he'd shoot them. The warning seemed to work. He heard footsteps running away. They moved their tents closer together and decided to have one person stay up at a time as lookout. The next day, they debated going home early but ultimately decided against it. They were sure they'd scared off whoever it was and planned to hike somewhere closer to the exit for one final night. After breakfast, they packed up and started back. During the hike, they ran into other hikers and told them what had happened. Those hikers were freaked out too. They chatted briefly before continuing on. When they stopped for lunch, the narrator realized those were the only other people they'd seen, despite tons of cars in the parking lot earlier. After lunch, they continued down the trail. After about 6 miles, roughly 3 miles from the nearest exit, they decided to set up camp. They pitched their tents and cooked steak and potatoes for dinner. They ate, drank, and smoked again before heading to their tents. In the middle of the night, the narrator woke up needing to pee. Out of paranoia, he brought the gun. While peeing, he heard leaves crunching nearby. His heart immediately stopped. He grabbed the gun, finished, pulled up his pants, and turned on his headlamp. The beam revealed the man from the day before standing in the distance, holding a machete. He could see him clearly now. Long, dirty black hair, super lanky. The narrator screamed and raised the gun as the man started charging. He fired every shot he had and must have hit him somewhere because he heard a yell and saw him fall. By now, Derek, Sophia, and Rachel were all awake. The narrator told them to pack up. They needed to leave fast. He didn't want to involve police, unsure if he could face charges. And honestly, the attacker's life didn't seem worth it. They didn't bother packing the tents. They grabbed their bags and practically ran the final 3 miles, making it to the cars in under an hour. They climbed in, locked the doors, and decided to sleep in the car for the night, covering the windows and trying to rest. When they woke in the morning, they left immediately and stopped for breakfast at a diner in a small town. They never called the cops, and the narrator remains conflicted about whether they should have. This happened years ago, and no reports ever came out. For all he knows, those psychopaths are still out there. If the story moved you, hit subscribe with notifications on. And tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from?